Relief printing is really fun. Relief printing is often the first technique in printmaking that one learns when one is first taking printmaking. In this video, I'm going to go over some very basic techniques for inking up speedy carve block and linoleum blocks and woodcut blocks, and what to look for in your prints and how to discern whether it's fully inked, whether it's a good print or a bad print, and to identify some areas of the print that might be printed incorrectly or could be printed better. Like most things, this is all practice. So the more you print, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. The things that I highlight in this video are things that I find that my students often ask me when they're first starting to do relief printmaking. They're basic tips and things to show you to help you make your prints better prints. So I hope they'll help. When you're setting up to print, you're always prepping a nice stack of newsprint and then a good stack of good paper cut to whatever size is appropriate. So if we go to our hypothetical of printing an edition of 10, how many pieces of good paper do I need to prep? What I always think about is how complicated is the print. Am I doing 5 blocks color print? Am I doing just one color? That kind of thing. So if I'm going to do a print edition of 10 of one color, that's fairly easy, but you always have to prep more paper than you think you need. You don't want to have to stop, clean your hands, prep paper, and then go back to printing. Don't really want to deal with that. Also, just know that a 10% tear rate is excellent. The tear rate means how many are you going to tear up? Which are the ones that are bad? That means that if I print 10, 9 were excellent. So think about how hard that might be. Printing 10, 9 are perfect. Doesn't give me a whole lot of room for error. When you first start printing, your tear rate might be 50%. One thing that's really easy to start with is that, you always print on the newsprint until you get it fully inked, and then you go to your good paper. So that will help you to not be blowing through your good paper. So I know you're thinking, whoa, half of my prints won't be good? I'm like, yeah, maybe. But remember, you're going to have all these prints that you've made on newsprint. Newsprint's not archival. So these, you're probably going to recycle these, or bigger prints, I use them as wrapping paper. But then you've got all your prints on the good paper. Well, they're not going to go to waste, these ones that weren't good. You can collage on them, you can draw on them, save them for other projects. It is good quality paper. So that's just kind of the way it goes. The better you get at this, the more prints will be good in your printing. Let's run through all the variables here for just a second. Okay, with the ink, how much ink do I have? Is it stiff enough? Am I pushing really hard when I roll on my block? Am I pushing really hard here? That doesn't matter. What am I printing with? How much pressure am I using? What kind of ink? What type of paper? Am I shifting paper? Because we're hand printing, we're going from newsprint to washi. There isn't much difference there in terms of the pressure that needs to be applied or how smooth the surface is, very smooth. If we were going from newsprint to Western printmaking papers like Reeves BFK or Stonehenge or something, there can be quite a difference between how something prints on newsprint and then how it prints on the good paper. And we usually have to shift to a little more ink when we go to the good paper. So there's lots of variables. It's about keeping it all as consistent as possible. Okay, the number one thing that people do wrong is they use too much ink. How much is too much? This is most definitely too much. Also, they push too hard. So if I push really hard and I have too much ink, what do you think's going to happen? Right, I'm going to be pushing this ink down into the low areas of the block. You can already see, like right there, I've filled that in. That should be carved away and have some texture in it. This is so heavy on here that when I go to print, so I'm just going to print one on newsprint, even if my pressure is really good, that kind of moderate, even pressure over the whole thing. Okay, well, it looks pretty good. I hate when it does that. Okay, so to just make a point here, if you can look on the block, you see how it's starting to fill in the non-image areas? Not good. I just want to show you like crazy amount of ink. Like, look how much ink this is. Can you see how whole sections of my block, the low areas, are just filling in when I'm putting this on here? This is way over inked, way over inked. So maybe when I try to print this one, and maybe if I compound it by pushing really hard with my spoon, then look, I get this print, which is basically a hot mess. That last one that I was trying to do poorly actually printed pretty well. But notice how I've got this crisp edges to everything, and this just looks like everything is mushing together, and it's much, much darker because I have all this ink in the low areas of the block. Yuck. How can you tell when something is fully inked? This becomes a little tricky and also becomes something that has personal preference in it. So if you look at these three prints, you might say, well, this one probably looks like it's fully inked. And yeah, I think this one is probably printed the best out of all of them. They all have salt and pepper. They all have in their blacks areas where little white of the paper shows. I had a hard time with this lino cut because it's printed on paper that has a lot of texture. But if I start to dissect these, I see that this boot's a little light on this one. This doesn't look like it's inked completely here. This one's a little light here, and also a little light on the boots. This one overall is the best printed. I don't mind a little salt and pepper, but I don't want it to be distracting. I don't want to look at the print and go, oh, look, there's salt and pepper there. I just want to look at the image and not be distracted by the inking. This is a different color, to be sure, but you can see that this one's printed very solid, very nice and evenly printed. And when I look at that compared to this, setting aside the fact that it's a different value of ink, I really like it when it's fully solid, when my blacks are fully inked up. It means that I'm just looking at the forms, looking at the image, not distracted by the printing. Most printing problems are pretty subtle. If you look along the edge here, you can see that's that little bit beveled edge on the material that I just forgot to go in with my spoon, my Baron, to print that very well. If you look over here on this one, you can see that one's printed correctly. Over here, this is just a note to myself that there's some chatter here, and I carved it away for this print. So that's more of a state of the block issue, whereas that's definitely a printing issue. This is a woodcut part of one that I printed with using oil-based inks. With oil-based inks, a really common thing that happens when you over ink is you get some smearing. So sometimes it's that balance between fully inked and not getting too much ink so it doesn't start to smear. If you look in here, particularly through here, you can see there's smearing there. That means that even though I had it fully inked for this, some of these smaller little thinner details needed less ink on them. So I should have been maybe a little more selective in my inking. In other words, roll over the block more here and maybe lighten up a little bit here in how many rolls I do. The other thing that this could be, this was press printed, is that when you set the paper down, if you're not really careful, it can move a little bit. Move when you set it down, move when you put the blankets or the chipboard down, that kind of thing. The issue with all these things about misprints is that you need to teach yourself that after every print you're looking at the print and scanning it to see if it has any of these issues, so that you don't just keep repeating it, and printing print after print that has all these same problems with it. So when I was printing this one, I probably made sure to check and scan this section of this print every time if I found that that was an area that was showing a lot of smearing. Mistake number 2, uneven inking. So notice that I have ink up here, but then down here I've tried to keep it as even as possible. But what if I kind of wasn't paying attention and I had it like this? And I'm like, well, that looks pretty even, but actually I might have some hidden more ink on this side. When I go to print, or roll up my block, it can lay down the ink unevenly. You want even here, even here. Okay, now I can keep rolling over this because I can see through the raking light that it's not even. So, okay, so if I fix it, I can just be sure that I'm rolling over the block multiple times and then I'm rolling this out enough so I have this nice even slab of ink. Uneven inking can also look like not inking up the block already. In the other video I talked about how sometimes these blocks have an edge that's kind of rolled. It's not as crisp as the other ones. I've seen that in linoleum blocks too. So being sure that you're adjusting your brayer so that you're getting it all the way off on the edge. Sometimes too, notice that I'm usually starting my rolls inside the block and rolling off, making sure I go all the way off each corner. It can be easy to miss a section and somehow you've got part of the print that doesn't show. Part of the print that doesn't print right, it could either be an inking issue of being uneven. I guess this would be number 4, 5, whatever number I'm on. It could also be a printing issue. What if I just, oops, I missed that corner. I was too preoccupied with yakking away with you that I forgot to print on that corner. So you have to kind of look at your block. I can see there's still some ink here. That tells me that it was a printing thing and not an inking thing. So I would try to adjust and print another one and account for that. A really common error in printing happens when a little bit of lint or your block material, whether it's lino, a little piece of crumbly lino or a bit of the Speedy Carve block, gets onto your ink slab and then it transfers itself to your block and then it prints. So if you look at these color prints, and they are different from each other, wasn't trying for an addition here. Notice that there's a white dot here. There's also a white dot here and almost a little white dot there. If I go back to my black and white print, you can see I don't have that dot. Those shapes are supposed to be solid. So what this means is that there's probably a little bit of something that was on my block and it could have persisted actually for a couple prints. It's even worse down here. If you look at this, see how there's like a dot and then a white halo around it? That's really typical of what it looks like when there's a little piece of something on your block. Again, if I look at this black and white one, I can see that it's not there, so that's definitely an issue. It's important that you look at every print after you print, and if you see something like that, you pick it off your block, and if you catch it in time, I could have taken a piece of printmaking paper or even a little piece of mat board and tapped it into this color ink and then tapped it right like that and hidden it. Now I'm not going to be able to match this exact color probably. You can see here that here's that dot, that's an issue, and I didn't catch it, and it obviously stayed on there for this print at least, and that's where it is. So it's important that you pay attention to any muck that might be on your rollout or on your brayer, and definitely by the time it gets to your block, it's going to start to make printing problems. A lot of this video has been talking about addition printing. What I haven't talked about is that any prints that don't make it into the edition, maybe they're good prints, but they're a little too light or too dark, something like that, they could still be artist proofs. And there's other designations for how you sign prints. If you're my student, there is a handout that talks about signing and what you designate prints and how you sign prints for an edition. So one of the things I can do with hand printing is, instead of making a print that has really even pressure over the whole thing, I can play around with having one section printed darker than another section very easily, actually, compared to on a printing press, where what it does so well for us is it prints very consistently and at the same pressure across the whole block. So if I just gently pat my paper down and then I went in to a specific area, in this case this flower that's right in the center, with a baren or even with my finger, and just applied a lot more pressure. And you can see I've got this subtle difference where I have it darker on the side. That's something that hand printing, it's very easy to do. I hope that you found these tips useful, and I hope they will help you become a better printer and a better printmaker. We didn't talk about aesthetics, but that of course is really important. What is content? What are you trying to say? What do you want to communicate? Think about that as you make your prints. And happy printing!